So good afternoon, everyone. Yesterday, around this time, I got a text message while I was at home from our senior minister here, Duke Tufty. And in this message, he gave me some sad news about himself and a friend of his. He texted that he wasn't going to be here today to do Sunday morning service as he had planned because a friend of his had passed away, and he was going to go to Sioux Falls. He was going to drive today to Sioux Falls to be at the memorial service. And so when I got this message, I was almost out the door already and heading to Unity Temple. And the first thing I replied, of course, was to send my condolences. I sat and, if you know Duke, he's not exactly the most emotive person here. And so it was kind of hard to gauge what was going on for him. So I remember just kind of looking at the text going, oh, okay, so I send my condolences. I didn't really know, how close of a friend, et cetera, that this was. But I said, hey, Duke, are you at the temple? Because if so, I'm going to be there. And so he said, yes, I'm on the back porch. And I said, great. So I thought that was good news that I would be able to connect with him in person. And so when I did, of course, he asked me to speak at the morning service. And so I said yes, of course, I would, to support him. But when I walked out to the back porch here, which is just right outside from the back kitchen, I saw him sitting on his chair. And instead of facing like the street where people walk by, he was facing the playground down here. And, usually when I walk in, Duke is like this, all chipper, and he wasn't like that. So I just noticed, without really saying anything, just noticed that he was a little calmer than usual, but he did look like he was on vacation with this, sweet shirt of his and suntan, and he was facing the sun, as he told me. He was sunbathing. He was facing the sun, and I could see the light on his face. So I was, again, watching to see how he was doing. I saw that there was a chair sitting next to him, and so I pulled up the chair and I sat right down. And again, when a friend is grieving, you just want to be there. So I sat down quietly to gauge, to see if he was okay. And so he started to talk about this friend. Apparently he has known this woman for over 50 years, which is older than I am, like he's known her for longer than I've been alive. And I thought about that and then how I could even fathom that. And then I sat with him further, just sat with him until he talked. And so he talked about how he was going back, not really just for her, but for all of his friends of that age, because he said, I don't know if I'll see them again. And I thought, wow, that's a big deal. And so at that point, I started to be a little bit more like, what does he need from me? Should I worry? But then everything shifted in a moment as the two of us were sort of seated right beside each other. He looks up as if just to notice me finally, like, there I am. And he looks down and he looks at my feet and he looks at my shoes and he's like, nice shoes. And at that moment, I smiled because anyone who knows Duke knows that this man loves shoes. And he wears shoes from Europe, leather bound. But I do notice that when I walk into a room, even our staff meetings, he'll look around the room and look at people's shoes. And he's always, obsessed with buying really cute shoes. But in that moment, I smiled because I thought, there he is. Duke is here, you see? Like he had kind of tuned out, it seemed, but I was like, he's here. Because this, to me, was one of the habits that Duke has, a sort of pattern of being that I recognize as being him. That's Duke. And so it made me think about how each of us have these patterns of behavior, right? And for many of us, what we adore about our loved ones are the patterns of behavior that are idiosyncratic, that are quirky about the people we love. And we notice the way they do things. Like I know that even though I'm not thrilled about this characterization, I have an old friend who's like, oh, there's Nhien, she's doing it on her own walk. Like apparently I have a doing it on my own walk. And Duke calls this walk the sergeant walk. So I walk down the hall like this, unbeknownst to me, but to them, there's a little bit of charm in this, right? There's a pattern behavior. Terry shared with me that her little boy, Alex, age 9, actually has this thing where he has a habit of mind so ingrained that he has this internal alarm clock that goes off once every hour, no matter what he's doing, playing Legos, playing out in the street, and on the hour, he remembers to hug mama. So he goes from wherever he is, and he goes to hug his mom. So he has this really adorable habit of behavior. Sarah, who's part of our Unite service, shared with me that her uncle always kept wintergreen mints in his car. So that, you imagine being a little kid, you go in your uncle's car, you can count on that he's going to offer you some wintergreen mints. And that's the thing, it's the thing that he does, right? We all have these things that we do that make us us. And the thing is, we start to think that these patterns are who we are. So I want to talk today about how the truth of who we are is beyond these patterns. They can be reflected in these patterns, our personality, if you will, but they are not the truth of our being, which is whole, which is perfect in spirit. Because here's the thing, we all have these patterns of behavior that can be endearing. But chances are, if you're anything like me, then you might also have certain patterns of behavior in your life that have hurt you, that have been destructive or harmful, either to yourself or the people you love. So I want to explore today these different patterns of being. Let's start for a moment by steeping ourselves in a memory or thought of a pattern or behavior. How about in ourselves that is endearing? If I can challenge you to think of that, let's take a moment first to consider a pattern that you have. It's the way you chew your gum, right? For me, the way my mom half smiles and her lip curls up one side. What's a pattern of behavior of yours that you could just take a moment to appreciate? And if some of you struggled, I invite you to consider, some are shaking your heads, that could be challenging. You might want to consider a pattern of behavior in someone you love that they may think is like this imperfect thing that they do, this awkward thing that they do, but you find it incredibly endearing. Just take a moment to consider that. Something they do. Apparently, I chew loudly. I didn't know. Not very endearing, though. So, yeah. But today, I want to challenge us to consider then, as we look at the patterns of behavior in our lives, to take one today. It could be a big one. You could be facing addiction right now and dealing with recovery, whether it's addiction to work, to alcohol, to drugs. Some of us are just addicted to being busy. Some way of staving off the reality of our own being and of our lives. I invite you to consider one habit that you engage in that doesn't serve you. It could be as extreme on the one hand as an addiction, but it could be something a little bit smaller, maybe the fact that you tend to show up late everywhere. Or maybe it's a habit of procrastination that hasn't served you in your life. Maybe you've been habituated all your life to avoid conflict. And so some of your relationships might be struggling because as soon as conflict happens, you disappear. Maybe something like that. Something to consider that is actually harming you. In traditional Christianity, there's this idea that we come to church and we're told that we are sinners and we're told to stop doing these sinful things that are harmful to ourselves and others. So I want to share from a unity perspective how we hold these notions of you can be actively engaged in behaviors that do not serve you, but from a unity perspective, we don't believe you are sinners. Here in unity, we are grounded fundamentally in the idea that we are not born in original sin. Rather, we are born in original blessing, that the core of who you are is deeply whole and perfect. And so the idea is that when we talk about sin, we're really just talking about an error of perspective, a mistake in consciousness. And so we say that it's not that you get punished for your sins, like in the old model. Oh, I did this bad thing and now this God from on high is going to punish me. It's not that we're punished for our sins, it's that we're punished by them, right? Because if we are in that place of avoidance or of being numbed out, or if we're a rageaholic, if you will, if we tend towards having a temper, the experience itself is the pain, is the hell, right? And so that's the idea that when we choose one of these, we consider, this is a gift to myself. When I take a look at one of the habits that has been keeping me from living my highest truth, all I'm doing is I'm stripping away one of the layers of that which is not me. So I can come into the remembrance of the radiant truth that I am and feel into the peace and the joy that comes from knowing that and living it and embodying it and then expressing our highest selves through that. So we are not punished for these habits. We are punished by them, if you will. We hurt as a result of them. So I invite you as we journey together to take something really tangible. Make a choice. It doesn't have to be that you're going to conquer this thing all in one day, but make a choice with respect to any one of your behaviors that you feel like, this probably doesn't help me live my highest truth. And maybe it's actually I have a habit of not speaking up for myself, not owning my truth, not sharing my feelings, but instead stuffing them down and hiding who I am. Maybe I'm willing to relinquish that and speak my truth more fully and connect with people and connect from the truth of my heart. Maybe that's what it is for you this week. So, as you do that, I invite you to consider the story about the challenges we face when we attempt to overcome our own habits. Because we all want to. We say, I'm going to stop eating that much cake, tomorrow. Like we have this way of saying, yes, we're going to do, I'm not going to be late next time. I'm not going to overcommit this time. And then we do it and we do it again and again, right? And so recognizing at the start how challenging it could be, I was reminded of a story of a teacher who did this illustration with her students where she took out the thin thread and she took one of her students and she asked him to put his hands together like this, and he did. And so she took the thread and she tied it once around his wrist, and she asked him to break it. And he went, and he did. It was easy. He broke the thread. And she said, when you do something one time, it's like that thread. Then she took another piece of thread and she wove it around his wrist twice. So, again, he broke through it, right? 2 pieces of thread, not so bad. But she did it again. 3 turns of the thread, 4, 30, 40. And of course, each time she wove that thread around, it got more difficult. And so she shared with her elementary school class, this is how habits are formed, right? We do an act once, but then every time we repeat it, it gets solidified in this way that imprisons us to this habit. And the prison starts to come from the fact not just that we know we have a habit, because how many of us know we have this habit and can't seem to break out of it, but it comes from the fact that our expert, evolutionarily amazing brains feeds into the cultivation of habits, because neuroscientists say that the brain is lazy, in as much as it wants to minimize the work that it does. So when it says, oh, you do this all the time now, I've got this, we're just going to put you on automatic. And so we're going to make what you do unconscious. You're just going to, you drive to the same place. And we're not going to have to think about it every time, so you can think about new adventuresome things. And so the brain is going to make you more efficient over time. And so that actually reinforces our habits. So when we recognize some of this, we can be a little less hard on ourselves when we consider, oh yeah, my brain is evolutionarily designed to reinforce this behavior that's maybe repeated now since I was a child, right? It's expressed maybe in subtly different ways, but I've been showing up like this since I was a child. Why is it that I compulsively caretake for everyone? Well, maybe I grew up in a family where my parents were alcoholics or addicts, and they weren't there to take care of me. And maybe in that moment, I learned this instinctive response. At first, it was just a response, but then over time, it became a pattern of just who I am in the world and how I think, who I even think is me. I don't even know the me that's free from that anymore, right? It started that young. Or for those of you for whom I heard, conflict, that like a chaotic family, right? You grow up in a chaotic family, and some of you, the strategy was to buck up and become strong, and so you get this grit in the world, and you're going to bust through life, but many others actually hid in the corner. If I get as quiet as possible, if I go to my room, then I will be safe from this. But going to your room doesn't work when you have a marriage now with a fellow adult usually, right? And they're trying to engage with you and interact. And so we have these patterns from early on that really can be reinforced over the years. And there's this deep importance of recognizing, maybe your pattern is of clinging, collecting. Some people call it hoarding, but I call it collecting. Collecting things because we never had a sense of financial security in our childhood. There wasn't enough food, or there weren't enough things, or you didn't have the toys that other kids had, and so somehow you find yourself wanting to purchase things, especially when they're on sale, even if you don't need it, right, and storing it. And so watching these compulsions that we have over our lifetime, so that now we can recognize them and perhaps have an invitation to look at them, then we can start this journey. I want to share a wonderful quotation from Wayne Dyer that is about the beginning of the journey towards opening up. He says this: for leaving old habits behind. You leave old habits behind by starting out with the thought, I release the need for this in my life. I release the need for this in my life. This way is so different from how many of us approach breaking habits. Just stop doing it. Stop doing it. But wow, what if I went deeper behind why I do it? What if, I confessed to Maka earlier this week, I'm on the couch with a big bag of chips and I think I'm going to eat the whole bag. It was a rough day. It hasn't become a habit yet, but there was this instinct to want to medicate. It was such a rough day, I wanted to medicate. And there's maybe a part of me, if I dug even deeper in it, that didn't want, or maybe didn't feel that I could handle all the feelings and sense of overwhelm that was there, right? So the need came from a belief that I couldn't handle the reality of my life. not from the belief that I need chips, right? So it's not the behavior, but if we look at why we repeatedly do what we do, if we could go behind that and recognize, why do you think you need that? What's driving that caregiving behavior? Do you feel that people will abandon you if you don't care for them? What's driving that aggressive behavior? Was there a point in your life when you came to believe that if you didn't overpower, you would be overpowered? And so instead of getting angry at ourselves for yelling at the people in our lives, instead of getting angry at ourselves for overeating, for compulsive shopping or hoarding or holding, we could sink back into a softer place, a place of deep loving kindness and compassion, and says, oh, here you forgot who you are. Here you forgot your own perfection. Here you forgot that you are infinitely provided for by the very source of life itself, which is the very fabric of your own being. Here you forgot that spirit, infinite, is the ground of your life, so you grab onto this thing, or you do this repeatedly, and you cling. So if we gently go back to the need, that's the first step. The second step is that as we endeavor to release patterns that are ingrained in our brains and our bodies, there's such an importance of seeking help, of knowing that even though it's a journey that you have to do alone within your own being to move this along, it's a journey that you don't have to do alone, that you can do holding hands with others who are embarking on their journey too, that you can find spiritual community, 12-step programs, Sangha, all these ways of saying, hey people, this is how I want to be now. This is who I really am. This is how I'd like to show up, not like that. And to find support in that. And then to even have positive reinforcement for yourself. When these people who get it can say, wow, to someone else it wasn't a big deal to take your first solo weekend vacation. But because they know you, they know how hard it was for you to leave your family behind to do something for yourself. And they can applaud that and reinforce it and love you through it when you're feeling the strain and disorientation and discomfort of even admitting that this is a problem for you in the first place as you move forward. Another piece that comes to heart for me, this is important for me to remember, and I'm not very good at it, is lightheartedness about it. A sense of humor about your own stuff, if you will. And boy, T. Marnie Voss last week, who here was here for T. Marnie? This comedian that came in was just amazing, and I got to sit next to her there. And so, she was here for the 10:30 a.m. service, and then she came to our service. And when Maka platformed for her, Maka did this amazing announcement for Marnie, and everyone's applauding. And as everyone's applauding, Marnie runs up to the platform, stands up here, and Maka's still here. And Marnie takes a few minutes and then realizes, oh, it's not my turn yet. She's like, oh, then she goes back to her seat, and then she kind of looks over at me, and I think I thought she whispered, but I think she said it kind of loudly. Nhien, I did the same thing in 10:30 a.m. service. And I'm like, hilarious. She's like, I just did the same mistake. And then later on, when it was actually her turn to come up, Maka, everybody was done, I nudge her. The order of service was right here. I nudge her. She's like, whatever. I'm not going. And she just cracked me up with how she held her own mistake. What a great reminder to me of like, oh, yeah, oops, I did that again, didn't I? Okay, I'm going to pick myself up and move on to the next thing. But yeah, I'm not gonna shame and blame and condemn myself for this. And of course, in the spirit of humor, she reminded me of a meme that I read on Facebook, where the person says, "I never make the same mistake twice. I make it 5 or 6 times just to be sure of it," right? I never make the same mistake twice. 5 or 6 times, or 50 or 60. Some of us have been doing this for decades, whatever it is we've been doing. So humor is all important. And I want to close with a story that to me is the core of how we can be supported in living our greatest lives, living with greater freedom from these compulsions that take us from our good, the ways of procrastination keeps us from applying for the job that we say we want, but somehow we can't get it together to fill out the application. The ways in which we are late. We say we want to learn and grow, but then we're chronically late to see our therapist. I think I've shared this example a few times, maybe because it's my own, but the things that we do that we feel sabotage what it is we say we want, that in the end, perhaps the deepest thing that we need to know is this. First of all, Charles Fillmore, co-founder of the Unity Movement, said, remembering that here in Unity, we don't teach that the kingdom of heaven is someplace way over there after we've done all these good things and we deserve to enter the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness, of peace, of joy, happiness, and fulfillment found right here. But we can't be numbed out on potato chips in order to experience it, right? We can't be medicated by how the comforts of our own home and the things that we buy help us to feel insulated from the real emotions of our lives. Instead, we need to do the great work of consciousness building. And Charles Fillmore said, right here and now, the great work of character building is to be done. And whoever neglects present opportunities, looking toward a future heaven for better conditions, is pulling right away from the kingdom of heaven within themselves. So I'll close with a Zen story that embodies, for me, of all the tools and techniques I discussed today, this story embodies for me the core strength that we have that enables us to overcome any outer obstacle to the fulfillment of our soul's potential. And so there was a Zen student who approached his master and he said, I have this crazy temper, he said. And the master says, wow, well, that's fascinating. That's a kind of interesting thing to have. Can I see it? And the guy said, well, no. I mean, it's not here right now. It's not like I could just pull it out, And he said, well, that's a very curious thing, says the master. And then in his pause, he says, the fact that you cannot just pull it out on whim means that it is not your true nature, he says. Because it is not what you were born with. And so take a moment to even process what that might mean. That perhaps your true nature is none of these things that you've been doing even for decades of your life. That there is something deeper in you that is so infinitely whole, powerful, loving, and perfect. That were you simply to remember it and claim it and give it space, that which you are emerges in a way that, just like Moses parting the Red Sea, your habits that do not serve the emergence and expression of this truth fades away. It's not consistent with the energy of who you truly are. But if you were so lost in the identity of your habits as being you, then you've forgotten this power. And the beauty of the power is that it is who you are. And so, as we close this time together, I invite you to consider that all that the world ever truly needs is not for you to should yourselves into certain manners of behavior, but simply for you to remember yourself. And in the remembrance of this truth of who you are, then the habits that you developed to cope with a foreign world filled with separation and fear, that those things can more naturally and readily dissolve. And that in your willingness to bring this forth, you take the step of owning that this thing that doesn't serve you perhaps did meet a need of yours, and you can honor it for that. And that this thing that you would like to be now and express now can be held in supportive community. But most of all, that this thing that wants to emerge, that is behind the shell of these behaviors, is actually you. And so with that, I invite you to take a moment as we close, to just close your eyes with me and turn within. And take a moment to give thanks for yourself and for the truth that you are, the beauty, the wholeness, the love that you are eternally unencumbered and never changed by that outer behavior, allowing that truth to emerge in a way where there is forgiveness and love for all that has happened in the past, and only hope and faith and courage for the future. And so as you open your eyes, I invite you to bring your hands together in front of your hearts. Light beholding light, love beholding love.